Hello and welcome to Abuja this rainy Tuesday morning in the Federal Capital Territory. My name is Mwabos Njoko and this is coming to you on a rather cool, breezy, rainy morning. What are we discussing this morning? The Nigerian police. There was a time on this program I said that the Nigerian police was an abused and a misused institution. Some people took exception to that. I did not withdraw that statement because I tried to use facts and situations to back that comment. But that's not the issue we're discussing this morning. The Nigerian police, as the front leader in Nigeria's internal security, are these empty words, or are we making them realistic, functional? Are we providing for the police to deliver on that as the front leader in internal security? Are we training them? By the way, are they in fact enough in number to execute and deliver on that mandate? Tomorrow, Wednesday, that issue may crop up at a different event. But this morning, I have in the studio those who know or who should know. Let me start from my left. I have Folari Aluko. Folari Aluko is the past chairman of NBA, Nigerian Bar Association, Abuja. They call them Unity Bar. Folari, you're welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, sir.
Please, how united are you people in that bar? By the way, what do you serve in that bar? Champagne? Or only water?
We serve the rule of law, and as its name is called, the sobriquet, the Unity Bar. To some degree, we try to achieve unity. Unity is not a destination; it is a process. And sometimes there's this saying: we agree to disagree, we meet to part, and we part to meet. So
that
yes.
We meet today, we won't disagree.
Hopefully, by
Thank you very much. And on my right is Idris Power. Idris Power is a gentleman who is focused on police affairs. He is a police affairs, not just analyst, but also an enthusiast. Power, you're welcome to the program.
It's a pleasure to be here.
How do you feel being associated with the police, with the Nigeria police?
Well, police is a good profession. However, we have a lot of challenges facing the Nigerian police. And
we'll look at all those challenges this morning. So we're looking at the Nigerian police as the front leader in internal security. And let me just create a foreground. In this country, let me go to before 1966, January 15. If you entered a train from Port Harcourt, I was in eastern Nigeria, from Port Harcourt going to Kaduna. Along the line, you could see a policeman. No guns, no firearms, a baton. He enters, scrutinizes, not necessarily the railway police, but majorly the railway police. And if they saw somebody who had a kind of haircut and they suspected the person was a soldier, they would approach him and confirm that he's a soldier. If he is, they ask for his pass. If he had no pass, the next station, they'll arrest him, bring him down, and hand him to the appropriate military authorities. And that soldier did not raise a whimper because he knew that that police officer was acting within the law. Again, around 1962, 61, 62, when there was the tea riot, And the Tafawa Balewa administration deployed the military. Nigerians were up in arms, protesting. How dare you deploy soldiers for what was essentially a civil disorder? And they took the Tafawa Balewa government to the cleaners. And then there used to be, or there still is, what then we called riot police, but it's now the police mobile unit. If civil disorder went beyond conventional policing, it was another arm of the police trained to operate within civil population that was drafted in. But after the 1966 coup, something happened. It appeared that there was a policy, a movement to underdevelop the Nigeria police force. Bringing us to this conversation this morning, are we just calling the Nigeria police the front leader in name? As an institution, do they even realize now, having been so underdeveloped for so many years? Are we equipping them enough? Are we training them enough? I'm going to begin with Idris Power. Idris, you know why I lay that foreground? So that the younger ones who did not know, experience a police force that operated in Nigeria could understand why we are holding this conversation this morning. My question, therefore, is the Nigeria police, in real terms, the front leader of Nigeria's internal security?
Well, as it is now, we cannot say that the Nigerian police is the frontline leader, because if you look at the 36 states of the Federation, we have deployed military to almost all the states across the 36 states of the Federation. So if we are saying they are the front leader, that is not actually the truth. Part of the challenge, just like what you stated, the police over time had a lot of challenges when it comes to funding, which I think was deliberate by the military coming in to ensure that issues surrounding internal security were not properly handled. I'll just go very quickly to something that happened 2020. The Bureau for Public Service Reform did a research on funding of the Nigerian police. The research is online. The Bureau for Public Service Reform is a government-established institution. Part of that report was that the police stations were given as much as 50,000 naira per quarter to run a police station.
50,000 naira per quarter?
Per quarter to run a police station, to manage a police station. Fueling of cars, buying of stationaries, paying electricity bill, ensuring there's clean water and all of that within the police station. How do we expect the police to function when this is happening? I'll go back a little bit. I think sometimes in, I can't remember the year, there was a particular year the police had a budget of about 28 billion naira. How much was released? 8 billion. Where do you expect the police to get that additional 20 billion to manage the affairs or the policing of the citizens? So it's been one form of deprivation and another, particularly to the Nigerian police, and that has done a lot of damage to our system. So how do we say, in fact, in terms of budgeting of the Nigerian police, they do what we call envelope budget, which is a very big problem. Have we taken time out to say, for instance, let's take a state as an example. I'll use a state like Kaduna, for instance, or let me say Enugu. Every police post should tell us how much they need to run that particular, post. Yeah. From post, you come down to divisional level. How much does the DPO need to effectively police that division? From the division, you come down to the area command. How much does the area commander need to oversee the affairs of the police within that space? And then you come to commissioner of police. By the time we have a budget that flow from down top, then we know how much exactly we need to fund a police station or a police in a state. Without that, we are just wasting our time. Truly, as we speak, the military, majority of their institutions, like the training schools, NDA and all of that, they have separate budget outside that of
the military
operations. The police colleges, do they have something like that? No. Why is it so? Visit any barracks in Nigeria today and tell me whether human are actually living in those barracks. That's how appalling it is. For the way and manner the police even manages, it beats me. Because you can't build something on nothing and expect it to stay. That's one palace we know as lawyers. So I think we need to do more for the Nigerian police. I don't want to, let me start investigation, for instance. This part of, my colleague is here, is a lawyer. This is a part where you arrest before you investigate. And these are some practices that we shouldn't even allow at this 21st century. Once a matter is reported, police should be given the right equipment to do their investigation.
And the resources.
Arrest and then prosecute. But it's a different ballgame altogether. So there are a lot of challenges facing the Nigerian police.
I will come to some of them because many people experience them on daily basis and complain. Let me go to Fulani. Fulani, he's raised something that rankles. We in the media, we say, look, the police are irresponsible. They grab you, they detain you, and if you insist and make enough noise, they take you to court and they tell the judge, we are investigating. And with that, we are investigating, they now have the legal basis to dump you in detention. And he says, the procedure should in fact be suspicion, investigation, arrest, and prosecution. How did the police come to this? I want to ask you this question, drawing from the underfunding factor he has raised, please.
That's a fantastic question, and my very senior colleague, Mr. Bawa, is a police historian, in fact, the security historian, has laid a very solid foundation. You know, Nigeria is unfortunately a very interesting country, and as you rightly said, the process, we have this challenge because it is primarily a funding issue. Now, with investigations, in most cases, about 80 to 90% of crime or investigation is carried out at the scene of the crime. And most times, most of the evidence, if at all, is located at the scene of the crime. If you look at the provisions of the ACJA and the Police Act, they often require that when an incident is reported, that a police officer should be designated to go to the scene of the crime to conduct the investigation. But then there's a funding challenge. And so what tends to happen is that the police would invite, so if there's a petition, the police would invite the respondent, who then would either go willingly or unwillingly. And then, you know, once they're within custody, a lot of things tend to start happening. And so it triggers a series of events that should ordinarily not be so. So the first thing the police would do is, okay, now this person is invited, they want to ensure that the person comes when requested for, and so the person is arrested and then put on quote unquote administrative bail. And so it leads to a series of human rights infractions. I say that a lot of the time. In fact, Nigeria is maybe one of the few countries where you're invited by the police, you pay your way to attend to that interview, you pay your boarding, if you're flying or if you're going by road, you pay for accommodation. So a case happens in Lagos, you're invited to Abuja, You pay to be arrested and detained, and then because that's essentially what happens. And then after being arrested and detained, you may have to now bear the cost of the investigation by also paying, in so many ways. So I think everything comes down to a funding gap primarily. There's also a training component to that conversation, because what then happens is that what we find is that the police then are forced to rely primarily on statements, because it is statements that you extract from people in the course of this investigation that then makes it to court. And of course, once there's a problem with that statement, of course, the whole case is likely to crumble. So it's a very huge funding component and a training component as well, because in the 21st century, Ogabawa had mentioned that there are some things we shouldn't be discussing about in the 21st century. But a lot of crime, because we live in a digital economy, there are many ways to track and to investigate crime that do not necessarily involve inviting and arresting people before investigations. Because what that tends to do is that it then creates so many human rights problems that lead to distrust in the police, and then it creates a vicious cycle that doesn't help the police.
No, Fulani, I still want to stay with you. Well, first item we've identified underfunding of the police. But why do we underfund the police? It is an attitude. It is an establishment attitude. First, does the establishment realize the central role of police in internal security? Because if you do realize that central role, you prioritize it, you give it a value, and you give it a cost. So it is that attitude, that undervaluing of the function of the police by the establishment, not by Tinubu, not by a president, not even by the minister. The establishment that does budgets, weighs budgets, prioritizes funds, does not see the functionaries of the police as priority. It's a tangent. How are you lawyers? Because you feel it. At the end of the day, the shortage job is what you use to go to court.
Yes.
How do you react to it, and what are you doing about it?
I would say that's also a fantastic point, sir. The fault is historical in nature, and I think you did a very great job in laying that foundation. But what started with the military needing to undermine the role of the police as the frontline security actor when it comes to internal security issues, over the years led to, it first started as perhaps a means towards obtaining legitimacy by the military and legitimation. But we start to see a series of institutional reforms that were touted as advancements or reforms, but were actually directed at whittling away the powers of the police. This may shift some perspectives, but the Federal Road Safety Corps, for example, is an essentially police branch of the police
traffic.
And then you have so many civil defense, for example. So why
EFCC is big branch?
Yes, EFCC was, when it was proposed as an investigative arm of the police. They will only do investigations, but now it has become something else entirely. So why do we create, or why does the establishment tend to create other institutions and fund them more than the primary institution that is responsible for internal security? So I think that there's a huge problem there, and the current Honorable Attorney General of the Federation, when I think about 2 or 3 weeks after he resumed office, made a statement to this effect, and he recognized that there were some institutions that needed to be merged and brought together, and that we had a proliferation of public institutions. That statement was lauded by many public affairs analysts. Unfortunately, till today, no step has been taken in that direction. So, the question is, what are the interests within the establishment that are not that do not want to have a strong police force, because the truth of the matter is that it is the police force is the only force in any country that can actually handle internal issues. Of course, there's at a more extended level, there's that conversation about whether we should have state police versus federal police and so on. But I think at its core, it is only the police force that is trained and that at the moment has the public accountability mechanisms that can interface with the public. Now, with regards to how are lawyers handling situations, I think there's the public accountability conversation or part of that conversation. And of course, as you rightly mentioned, whenever there's an infraction on human rights, there has to be some sort of recourse or remedy. One of the biggest challenges that we have had in the legal profession since the passing of Chief Gani Fawemi is that most times, and I was just having a conversation with someone recently, we frame our public interest litigation from an individual perspective. And this, I will say this to lawyers now. Many lawyers, when framing public interest, not even public interest, when framing human rights infringement cases, we don't tend to look at the broad scope. And so when framing prayers, for example, prayers are framed, or the courts are asked to make findings in relation to specific cases, and not, for example, giving judgments, for example, that say that arrests before investigations are unlawful or illegal or prejudicial.
So there's nothing generic that can be used to apply to other situations.
Yes. So that's one major problem, and I think within the legal profession there's a lot of reform currently going on, because the situation cannot continue this way. I know, for example, that if I may speak just with by way of general knowledge now, for a long time, many lawyers would not challenge illegal arrests. So if someone has been arrested and detained, what we tend to focus on as lawyers is the illegal detention and not necessarily the illegal arrest. But there is more attention being focused now on illegal arrest. So an arrest that is based on on an agreement or a contract, for example, that is purely civil, you find lawyers challenging the arrest in court and the detention as separate incidents on their own.
But I've been calling Idris. Because the name I got was Idris. Am I correct? Or is it Ibrahim?
Idris.
Idris, I'm correct, my dear. But I want to come to you because the issue I raised with him was establishment attitude, which was the cause of the other things we discussed now. If we agree that the establishment attitude is wrong, if we agree that the establishment attitude does not place considerable premium on the police force and therefore underfunds it and under-prioritizes it, what do we do to begin to point to this failing and the danger of it?
First and foremost, I think the government has to be deliberate. Deliberate in the sense that we have to take the bull by the horn. I say it anytime, any day. If you want to secure Nigeria as it is today, fund and train the police officers, men and women, train them, and recruitment also. Again, there are a lot of things. When it comes to issue of recruitment, let me digress a little bit.
Yes, please.
How is the recruitment done? Who has the power to recruit and all of that? It has been even a challenge among the actors, the Police Service Commission and the police itself. And this is something that is very clear. Who has the mandate? It's the Police Service Commission. Again, that's a story for another day, because even the Supreme Court has made a pronouncement on that. I talked about budgeting system earlier. We should understand that policing requires funding. There are some basic issues that we try to do over time. My colleague was speaking about investigation. I give you an example again. While working with an international organization, we discovered that cases were lost and won based on lack of adequate or proper investigation
by the police.
Why was this so? Because they didn't have the requisite knowledge or even the equipment to carry out such investigation. What did we do? In FCT and in Lagos, we identified some crimes that we feel the police need some support. Once a case is reported to the police, we made, we call it SOP, that allows either the police within itself to get a lawyer or contact Ministry of Justice in FCT or in Lagos to be part of that team that will investigate the matter. And what does that do? The issue of actus reus, which is part of legal balance,
yes.
mens rea, the mental, all of this, the act. Once the lawyers involved, they identify some of these things early enough, and the police, based on those investigations and things like that, they are well prepared and give, very good investigative report. Outside of that, the issue of forensic became a very tough one again. We discovered that a lot of investigation being done by the police were just manually done. Sometimes victims are coerced into giving false statement and all of that. Then we decided to focus on training the police officers and equipping some of this, for instance, in Alagbon and FCT, with equipment to carry out forensic investigation. All of these are things that ordinarily the police should do, the government should do, but we allow international organizations to come in and play this role. For me, that is not very good, because we are also exposing our system to these organizations. What do we do? How do we move forward?
Yes.
It's very important. Training is very key. As we speak, the Police Act 2020 has been passed. I'm not sure, if not for organizations like P1, some other organizations working within the police space have decided to train the police officers on the provisions of this act. I'll tell you very simple. Arrest protocol, even ACJA, which my colleague spoke about, ACJL, made provisions on how you do arrests. As we speak, 90% of
police officers
who are on the field don't have the requisite knowledge on how to do these arrests. At some point, we tried to do an SOP, a forced order, but that forced order didn't see the light of the day. That's a pack. The Police Act 2020 has been passed. What about the regulations? That is a supplementary,
part of that law
that ordinarily will ensure proper implementation of the provisions of the Police Act. It has not been gazetted. Upon what law
will those stand now?
Policing even implementing the 2020 Act?
We'll come to that as a core issue. We'll come to that as a very big core issue. Let me turn to Fulani. Fulani, I asked Bauer what we can do for the establishment to begin to realize the central role of the police in internal security. Unless there's a method of interfacing with the establishment to bring as we're talking now, many of them are their offices and they will not even be following. Some of them are watching music on their others are busy discussing some other business opportunities, or maybe really doing other administrative job. So it requires a mechanism to interface with the establishment, and let those watching us understand what I mean by the establishment. There are agencies, there are offices, there are decision points within government. Is the office of the National Security Advisor watching this program, for instance? Is it of concern to that office? Is the office of the Minister of Police Affairs watching this program? Does it mean anything to them? Who is in charge of internal affairs? Are they watching this program? Because the outcome of the performance of the police reflects on whether they are delivering service or not. So, what mechanism can be adopted to get the establishment to be on the same page with what we're conversing on now?
So that's it's a whole lot,
isn't it?
Yes, it is because you would ordinarily expect that the initiative should come from the government, because I believe that security is everyone's business. It's not the exclusive preserve of just one institution. But if you look at Section 14 of the Constitution, you find, and several other provisions across the Constitution, Nigerian Constitution, you see that the government has a pivotal role and a primary role to ensure the security of the lives and property of Nigerians. And so, having said that, the pipeline should, or leadership should, come from government. So the fact that we're having this conversation already shows that there's a
challenge.
Someone has dropped the ball somewhere. But at the same time, also, we the people also have a responsibility, and that responsibility comes from the point of view of also having conversations like this and public accountability. And that is why it's important to engage with these stakeholders. Now, the national security infrastructure is one part of that establishment. We also have of course, the civil service as well, and then the legislature, because the legislature plays a very huge role in ensuring that, for example, if there are any laws that affect or impact on the police, that those laws, before they are passed, should be reviewed and vetted properly. So I would say that in terms of a mechanism that would draw the attention of these stakeholders, I think the first and the most important thing is to dialogue with them and to invite them. And I'm hoping that the NSA is watching this program, and if he's not watching live, his attention will be drawn to this program, after the fact. But this is an issue that should be of concern to all Nigerians, because security, we are only as strong as our weakest link. And I think the issue of security is everybody's problem. Mr. Bauer rightly talked about the provisions of the Police Act, which 2020, which of course introduces so many novel provisions, but it is not really about the issue of the laws. The question is, how are these laws implemented, and are the people who should implement them, do they even know that they have the responsibility to implement these provisions? So, I think it starts with a conversation, and in some cases, I referenced the late Chief Ganifawa.
Yes.
There is to some degree, room for public interests or strategic impact litigation as well, and I think that is something that should be taken up. Organizations like P1 have also taken an interesting step towards providing some sort of support towards, so for example, the right of access of people who are arrested before pre-trial detainees, the right of access to legal counsel, for example, which has been provided for under the Police Force Order 20, so that's a provision that is a police force order, but you find civil society working to give life to that provision. So you find lawyers in different police stations in some parts of the country, but there is need to expand these efforts and to also expand the dialogue as well.
Idris, sometimes it's not good for the outsider to cry more than the bereaved.
Yeah.
Because if we are raising these issues as outsiders, does the police leadership realize that as a frontline security institution, there are certain things that should be given to whom much is expected? Are they aware of it? And let me use street lingo. They don't shake body. Are they making the demands? Are they bringing these issues to public conversation? Because unless if they don't anyway, it means we are just when you cry too much for the dead, they say you killed him.
Well, I think the leadership of the Nigerian police, they are doing their best, truly. Why am I saying so? There's much they can do about, crying out for some of these things and things like that, based on the fact that they are a government institution. If, for instance, let me say I'm a commissioner of police and I cry out, maybe come to the media to spill out some of these things and things like the next thing, my job is...
Don't come to the media. Better go to your boss and let the media be there.
That is what I'm saying. Even bringing the media to my boss would be wahala. So for me, I think the hierarchy of the police, they are doing their best. It's just for us, like I said earlier, to be deliberate. What I mean deliberate, the government should take the bull by the horn and say, yes, we want to, seriously fund the police. I'm not taking away from the government. The government has done something for, again, the police trust fund that was established, over time. What have we been able to achieve since the establishment of the police trust fund? We are talking about policing, and sometimes the last administration, I was fortunate to be part of persons who developed the community policing framework, which was presented to the government, and very beautiful framework. What was that framework supposed to do? One, it's about intelligence gathering. It's about community engagement, because there's basically lack of trust between the citizens and the police. And this has given rise to the NSAS, for instance, the end bad governance, for instance. All of those things are because people don't trust the policing system. And we try to see, how do we ensure that there's that gap between the police and the citizen is breached. If you want to get intelligence, you have to work with the communities. So the community policing principle, I think how it is working now is a different ball game. I think we need to visit that and see what exactly are we doing when it comes to investigation, when it comes to intelligence gathering, because these are some of the things that will aid us in securing the environment. That's one. My colleague spoke about accountability. We have some basic institutions that hold the police to account. The National Human Rights Commission holds the police to account. How much have we been doing with that is something that I will ask my colleague in the Human Rights Commission to answer. The Police Service Commission itself, they have a key role to play in ensuring police is held account. The Ministry of Police Affairs has a role to play. The National Assembly, both the Senate and House of Representatives, they have committees on police. It's not about oversight and all of that things, holding them to account so that even one kobo that is given to them, how are they spending this money? I sum it up this way. If you cannot count, you cannot account. We have to need to hold ourselves to account, not just the police, every structure of our society. We need to hold ourselves to account so that we be accountable to every Nigerian.
We hold ourselves to count so that we can also be accountable. We have to know the numbers, how much was given to us, for what purpose, how much was deployed for each activity. When we count the numbers, we can give an account. Well, I have two gentlemen in the studio, Idris Bauer, police affairs analyst, and Folare Aluko, past chairman of MBA Abuja. They call themselves Unity Bar. We are discussing the Nigeria police as a frontline security institution for internal security. How well are they doing? How well are we doing for them? Are we calling them frontline just in words? Are we providing? Are we helping them to deliver? That's the conversation this morning. We'll take a short break and return. Please stay with us. You are welcome back. Now, every activity of the police force takes place within the context of rule of law. They are not invaders. If you break the law anyhow, anywhere, they are supposed to use the law to determine what happens to you. I didn't tell you at the beginning of this conversation that my two guests are also members of the Rule of Law and Empowerment Initiative. Gentlemen, am I right?
Very correct.
Rule of Law and Empowerment Initiative. Now, the second part of this conversation is the law that guides the police to be able to implement the rule of law. I think I want to summarize it like that, and that is let me be sure of that, is the Nigeria Police Regulation, the new Nigeria Police Regulation. Now, I am not quite educated on the content and the purpose of that new regulation. And please let me come from the point of ignorance, so that as I'm educated, my viewers will be educated. What is this new police regulation all about? I want to start from Aluko. What is it all about? We have been discussing the police institution. Now there's another law that seems to be regulating them. What is all about?
So the police regulations are a subsidiary legislation made pursuant to the Police Act. And the objective of the regulations is to provide what Mr. Bawad referred to as some sort of SOP, Standard Operating Procedure manual on how the police should function.
Please, I hope my viewers are following me to getting more educated, because they can go with the slangs and the abbreviations. Standard Operating Procedure for the police. How they ought to do what?
How they ought to do what they do. So it spells out because the Act can only create a general framework and overview. The purpose of the regulations is to spell out in very minute detail how the various functions and activities of the police should be carried out. At the moment, the current regulations that we have, I believe, are from 1964, 68?
Yeah, 68.
68. Which means that, and if you look at it, there are so many issues. Mr. Bauer was part of the team. I believe that
this is 18. Okay, because I smiled when you mentioned 1968. That again was under the military.
Yes.
Charles Dickens, everybody who watches this program knows that I always post that phrase, that sentence from Charles Dickens, which says, "Ask no questions and be told no lies."
Yes. So,
please go ahead.
So you find that there are so many. The current regulations actually cannot work. It's not sufficient to address the issues that the police face today. I'll speak from a general point of view and speak to, for example, issues like the regulations break the police formation into units and divisions. Just from the jurisdictional outline alone, you still have references to the old states, the old northern region, and so
okay.
You cannot have a police act of 2020 and then now place that on top of that a police regulation of 1968. It controls things like there are so many provisions within the regulations that will be considered to be gender insensitive. Today there are provisions that exclude women, for example. There are provisions that even control how much a police officer should have on his or her person. Something in the I think about 10 naira or something to that effect, which is, I don't know if we would find 10 naira notes in circulation today. So there has been a need to review the regulations, and it has been reviewed. So the question now is, at what point or how will the regulations be brought into the mainstream? It is for the regulations to be operationalized, if you may, and I'm sure Mr. Bauer knows.
Bauer, I was going to ask him really why the need for this regulation when there's a law.
Okay, first
But
and foremost,
yes, please. But you also do me a favor by educating me on certain specific provisions of that.
that's where I'm going to.
Yes.
Actually, the Police Act 2020 establishes something that has to do with community policing. And community policing, the earlier regulation we had nothing to do with community policing. So how do we operationalize that particular provisions? That's one. Just like he mentioned, how many of us know Gongola State? I doubt how many young ones know where is Gongola State. We still had Gongola State in that old regulation. So again, we need to actually do more work. Outside that, issue of protecting human rights is well embedded within the 2020 Act.
The new act.
Yes, that was not something we envisaged in the 1948 Act.
1968 Act.
No, 1948 police. We had 1948.
In other words, this is a colonial relic.
Exactly. The 1948 Act, yes, 1948, I'm correct. 1948 Act was actually something that was more coercive in nature. Now we have a 2020 Act that speaks about protecting human rights. Even issue around arrest protocol, which we spoke about earlier. All of these are well embedded within the 2020 Act. How do we operationalize some of these with the old regulation? It's a big challenge. So we need to have a regulation. Now we have a regulation. And that regulation broke down into the scope, actually, had to do with something around promotion of officers, appointment, promotion, and service, the year of service, which is within the ambit of the Police Service Commission. But who is in charge of ensuring this regulation is brought to life is the Ministry of Police Affairs. But what we did over time, we brought in, the Ministry of Police Affairs had a draft, brought in some experts who are working in this area, the police, the members of the National Human Rights Commission, Police Service Commission, all of us working together to ensure we have a very good, robust document that will speak to the provisions of the 2020 Act. We have a draft. That draft is ready, but it has not been gazetted by the government.
Is that draft before the government?
Yes, I can say yes, because the Ministry of Police Affairs have done well to send this draft to the Ministry of Justice, and the Ministry of Justice came up with some clarification that should be made, and we have worked on that with all the stakeholders, and now the thing is back to the police for them to make their own input. Then once that is finalized, it is sent for gazetting. And once we have a gazetted regulation, we are good to go. I say this because discipline of men, we call them, of officers and men of the police is well entrenched in this police regulation. Welfare of officers is well embedded within it. How do we ensure that this is done? Has to, issue surrounding the duties, even retirement and exit of officers are well entrenched in this regulation. I think I want to appeal to all the stakeholders who are working within this space, particularly those who are in charge of gazetting this regulation, to make haste so that we can, hit the ground running as far as securing our environment.
I still want to stay with you, Idris. To what extent will this document, this new regulation, enhance the operations of the police so that Nigerians can feel a police force, their police force, policing for them?
Okay, I want to let me marry the Police Act, the Administration of Criminal Justice Act, the Anti-Torture Act, all of these together to speak, generally about some of these issues. If you look at issue of investigation, we talked about.
Yes.
If a policeman wants to get information from a suspect, defendant, we call them now, the defendant might be tortured to extract information. The Anti-Torture Act has now made it a crime for you to torture somebody to extract information. And once that is established, the officer who was involved in that torture will be held to account and pay from his pocket any damages that may accrue. That is one component. The Administration of Criminal Justice Act 2020 and the ACJA at the state level also made it compulsory that when you are taking confessional statements of a defendant, it has to be recorded. Not just recorded, a person of his choice, either a lawyer, somebody from legal aid counsel, a relative who will not interfere in that investigation, should be present when that confession is taking place. And the Supreme Court has ruled that all of those confessions, all of those issues we are talking about must be corroborated before it becomes
unacceptable to be presented before a judge.
Yeah. So you can see the chain of all of this. If we take the police regulation seriously, some of these things I just highlighted are things that are taken care of. Come down to police welfare. We are talking about pension for police officers, the meager amount they are taking and all of that. This is something that will address pension of police officers. So for the police themselves, they stand an advantage to see this regulation being implemented. Issues surrounding their functions, their duties, even equipment, uniform are well entrenched within this regulation.
Okay. As we are at the beginning of this conversation, I had a little bit of a hunch. And I said, we're in Abuja, we're talking. Yes, it's all over the country, it's all over the world. From Lagos, people listen. But let us be frank. Can we take this conversation to these police stations in my village, to the police stations in the states and local governments? You discover that we are honestly conversing above their situation. This new police regulation that also takes account of the conduct of the policeman, as well as his remuneration and his comfort and his welfare, as well as the procedure for doing his job, they seem to be Abuja-centric and Lagos-centric. The lawyers who will raise issues when there's an infraction, they operate from Lagos and Abuja. Those of them in Karanamoda, those of them in Mbise, in Imo, those of them in Ede, in Osun State. We're talking Bankom, Balderdash, because they seem to have established themselves in a particular method.
So I think that the police actually use the regulation is their primary operational documents, because it is what guides the day-to-day operations of the police, and which is one of the reasons why the use of the old regulations cannot really sit on top of
the new
because just as you had rightly said, the old Police Act of 1948 was essentially a colonial document. The regulations of 1968 is not so far from. It reflects, an old philosophy towards criminology and criminal law, and it also reflects perhaps the intentions of the military, with regards to the attitudes of the military towards the civil population. So it is important to have a synergy between the current laws and, Mr. Bauer mentioned the Anti-Torture Act, the ACJA and the ACJL of the various states, that's the Administration of Criminal Justice Law, and the Police Act itself, which is the primary law. Many police officers, interestingly, might not have read or might not have even seen copies
or even heard.
I'm talking of the Act itself.
I know.
But they are guided by the regulations primarily.
in their day-to-day
operations. So it is important. I mean, once the regulations come into force, it has a way of reaching that police station,
the grassroots,
in Idemili, in Ede, and in various parts of Nigeria, through the grassroots police.
Falana, Aluko, sorry, let me take it from you. And this is my last question, if you don't mind. I asked him that question because in my mind, I thought that there should be a mechanism, a training mechanism. Beyond getting this gazetted, you can gazette it when the West wants to insult us. They say if you want to hide anything from a black man, put it in a book. That's an insult. After this has been gazetted, shouldn't there be a mechanism to train the police officer at the lowest level to be able to operate within these provisions?
Okay, thank you very much. I think I want to start from the National Assembly. The National Assembly should make effort once they are making laws to put in mechanism that will implement the provisions of such laws. That has been a very big challenge over time. We only had one that is very effective. The Administration of Criminal Justice Act and Criminal Justice Law, within it, created a committee to implement the provisions of the law.
Okay.
And that is so beautiful.
It's working out.
Yes, it's working. And I think we should imbibe this culture in almost all the laws that we are, working on. That's one component. The other part is we have some organizations who are working within this police space. P1, for instance, P1 is doing massively well. We can't take that away from P1. The Police Act, P1 has made a simplified version of that act, even with infographics, that people distribute at various police stations, so that the police can first and foremost be aware of the provisions of this law. That again is something that I think we are looking at with the regulation. Once it is gazetted, we have clean copies of it. We do some abbreviated version of it, and then create infographics that will speak about some of the provisions of the regulations.
I just have to apologize. My producer says you've shot beyond 1 hour. It is a crime in broadcasting, and he doesn't want me to be a criminal. And all I need to add at this point is that the Rule of Law and Empowerment Initiative, where my friends this morning came from, they are having to escalate this matter tomorrow, Wednesday, when they call stakeholders together to look at this gazetting of this revised police regulation and how it can be effectively implemented, how can the Police Act can be effectively implemented. I think we'll try to be there tomorrow to learn more when there are more people speaking about it and more contributions that can be better educated. For this morning, that's our program for this Tuesday morning. The police, Nigeria Police, as a frontline security institution, how well are we packaging them, preparing them, provisioning for them? Or are we leading them into temptation, asking them to go without equipping them, without providing for them, without giving them the right rules, in fact? In other words, to be there doing their thing the way they can best do within the circumstance. Well, my guest said there's much more to be done for the police to deliver on its mandate. This conversation will continue at a different forum tomorrow. For this morning, I want to thank you for investing your time with us. My name is Kumar Boyzenjoko. Let me, at this point, thank Idris Bauer, Police Affairs Analyst. Idris, thank you very much for coming.
It's a pleasure, sir.
And Folani Aluko, Past Chairman, Nigerian Bar Association, Abuja Unity Bar. Please, when are you going to come to the bar? He will come to the bar. Don't mind. I will hold him Unity and United Bar. For this morning, please invest the rest of your day wisely. Good morning.